Have you ever asked yourself if crowns, armies, and unending riches can silence the smell of a body falling apart? In the suffocating summer of 1598, the magnificent monastery palace of El Escorial was no longer a sanctuary of triumph. It became a living tomb. Behind its thick granite walls, King Philip II of Spain, ruler of an empire where the sun was said never to set, faced the darkest truth. Power cannot bargain with decay. The air inside his chamber was heavy, oppressive, as if every stone absorbed the cries of the dying monarch. The man who once commanded fleets across oceans now struggled to command his own breath. His swollen joints, crippled by years of gout, were only the beginning. Boils erupted across his flesh, each bursting to reveal ulcers that spread like creeping shadows. Attendants whispered that his hip wound was so deep it revealed bone, and every change of bedding brought forth basins of foul discharge. The most powerful king of his age, who silenced nations with a decree, now groaned helplessly beneath sheets soaked with pus and sweat. And here, my friend, lies the cruelest irony. Courtiers once bowed in reverence, yet now they covered their mouths with perfumed cloths to endure the stench. Even priests, steady in prayer, found their voices trembling as swarms of flies tapped against the windows. The grandeur of empire collapsed into the raw reality of flesh undone. If these forgotten stories stir your mind, imagine what more remains hidden in the shadows of history. Subscribe now so you never miss the tales that remind us how fragile power truly is. Join this journey into the past, where kings bleed, empires fall, and death spares no one. Because in the end, the echo of Philip's chamber was not the rustle of silk or the sound of trumpets, but the unmistakable truth that wealth, faith, and glory cannot silence the grave. The illness that consumed Philip II began like a familiar adversary, his old companion, gout. For years, the stabbing pain in his joints had bent him into a prisoner of his own body. Yet in that final summer, the enemy changed form, becoming something darker, something merciless. Ulcers blossomed across his skin like wounds carved by unseen blades. They deepened until flesh gave way to raw caverns, so vast that bone was said to show through. What might it have felt like to see the strongest man in Christendom reduced to such fragility? His attendants, trained to bow in reverence, now struggled not to recoil. Each day they filled basins with putrid fluid drained from his sores, two entire vessels of decay, carried away as though the palace itself was drowning in corruption. In another man, these wounds would have been tragic. In a king, they became a grotesque revelation. Sovereignty could not command the body to heal. Outside his chamber, El Escorial shimmered under the relentless sun. The palace had been built as a monument to faith and power, but now it turned traitor. The granite walls captured the heat, and within those walls the odor of rot became inescapable. Curtains were drawn, incense burned, herbs scattered across the floor, but nothing could mask the truth. The king's chamber was suffocating, not from grandeur, but from decay. At first, courtiers endured the atmosphere out of duty. Yet over time, their loyalty faltered. The act of kneeling by his bedside was no longer a gesture of devotion, but a trial of endurance. Some pressed perfumed cloths to their faces, others muttered prayers faster, as though words might shield them from the smell. But every Ave Maria was drowned by the buzzing of flies against the windows, each one a reminder that even insects found dominion where the monarch could not. This was not the empire of glory sung in chronicles. It was an empire collapsing into one room, one bed, one suffering man. And it was here, in the heat and stench of El Escorial, that history whispered its cruelest lesson. Death does not negotiate. If you've made it this far, you can already feel the weight of history pressing in. Don't let these forgotten echoes fade. Subscribe now and journey deeper into the shadows of the past, where empires fall and the stories no one dares to tell still wait to be heard. The palace chamber did not belong to Philip alone. It became a kingdom of insects. Flies, drawn by the sickly sweetness of decay, clouded the air. They laid their eggs in wounds too vast for attendants to cover, and soon the sores writhed with pale larvae. To servants it was a sight both revolting and unbearable. Yet in a cruel paradox, the worms devoured necrotic flesh, slowing the tide of corruption just enough to prolong the king's agony. Life fed on death, and death lingered longer than anyone wished. Imagine standing in that room, hearing the faint squirm beneath the sheets, while your sovereign cried out in pain. Even hardened courtiers shivered. To change his linens was to confront rivers of pus and colonies of maggots clinging to royal flesh. Every scream from the monarch was a reminder that even kings could not command silence when the body revolts. The nights were worse. By day, the court could disguise horror behind ceremony and ritual, but darkness stripped away illusions. Through the long hours, the corridors echoed with Philip's groans, his cries puncturing the silence like a dirge. Servants lit candles, trembling as they approached his bed. Some whispered that the king's voice no longer sounded human, but more like the moans of a restless spirit trapped between worlds. Could you have entered that chamber in the dead of night, knowing what awaited within? Would you endure the cries, the smell, the sight of worms feeding on a king? For many, fear outweighed loyalty. Some prayed outside the door instead of stepping inside, hoping their distance could still count as devotion. But for those who stayed, priests, attendants, the closest advisors, each moment beside him was a trial of the senses and of the soul. This was not just sickness, it was spectacle. El Escorial had turned into a stage where decay performed its merciless play, and all who entered became unwilling witnesses. And still the monarch lingered, caught between the world of the living and the inevitability of the grave. These are the details history tried to silence, yet they speak louder than any triumph written in golden chronicles. If you want to uncover the truths hidden in the shadows of time, subscribe now. Join the journey, and let these untold stories remind us all: no throne, no crown, no earthly power can keep death at bay. The physicians of Philip II's court clung to their rituals, desperate to appear useful. They bled the king, draining what little strength remained. They applied poultices laced with substances that burned rather than healed, leaving his flesh raw and blackened. Remedies meant to cure instead became instruments of torment. In another era, such treatments might have been condemned as cruelty, yet in 1598 they were paraded as science. Each attempt at healing only pushed him closer to ruin, and the chamber of El Escorial became less a sick room than a laboratory of despair. The contradiction was unbearable. While physicians argued over methods, the king's body collapsed further, every ulcer a testament to their futility. His once imposing frame shrank, his skin stretched tight over brittle bones. No decree could halt the betrayal of his flesh. His empire extended across oceans, yet within his body he ruled nothing but a collapsing kingdom of sores. And still, his spirit fought to endure. Despite the torment, Philip clung to his faith. Each day he demanded mass at his bedside. His voice quavered in prayer even as his cries of pain broke through the solemn ritual. Witnesses described a man whose soul sought heaven while his body rotted toward the earth. It was a clash of opposites: devotion against decay, will against weakness. The courtiers who gathered around him saw both sides of this contradiction. They saw the king's lips whisper prayers, and then, only moments later, those same lips trembled with screams that shook the walls. His attendants, torn between reverence and horror, struggled to reconcile the sight. The most devout monarch of Europe, reduced to begging for relief like any common man. The stone halls of El Escorial echoed with this paradox, amplifying it until even the bravest souls felt their knees weaken. What lesson does this leave us, centuries later? That power and faith can stand proud, but the body bows to time. That even kings can pray with conviction and still be devoured by decay. If these forgotten truths stir something within you, don't let them vanish into silence. Subscribe now to keep exploring the shadows of history, where faith collides with mortality, and every untold story reminds us how fragile even the greatest rulers truly are. The end came slowly, as though death itself lingered to savor the ruin of a king. By September, Philip's body was swollen with fluid, his abdomen distended, his breath ragged and shallow. The ulcers had eaten deep, and even the strongest incense could not mask the reek of corruption. His attendants knew the moment was near, yet dread hung over them. They were forced to witness not a dignified passing, but a prolonged spectacle of agony. On his final night, Philip's eyes sought the heir who stood trembling by the bed. The king's voice, once commanding fleets and armies, broke into whispers. Was this suffering punishment, or was it a lesson meant to humble all who ruled after him? No one dared answer. Just before dawn, he released a final groan, and the chamber fell silent. The most powerful monarch of his age was gone, leaving behind not triumph, but a stench that clung to stone and memory alike. The rituals of burial were hurried. His body, collapsing faster than priests could chant, forced attendants to shorten ceremonies. Sealed within El Escorial's vaults, Philip was laid to rest among his ancestors. Yet even in death, the memory of his final weeks refused to be buried. To Protestants across Europe, his torment was divine retribution. To Spaniards loyal to crown and faith, it was a test of sanctity. But to history, it was something more chilling. The reminder that empires fall not only on battlefields, but also in the quiet rot of a sickbed. El Escorial stood as a monument to power, faith, and eternity. Yet after that summer, it became a monument to something else, the inevitable collapse of the flesh. Courtiers who once paraded in its halls never forgot the stench, the groans, the sight of their sovereign consumed alive by decay, and centuries later, we still speak of it, not as glory, but as warning. So ask yourself, what lingers longer, the victories of kings or the whispers of their deaths? The story of Philip II proves that memory clings not to triumph, but to tragedy. If you have followed this journey to its end, don't let the voices of the past be lost. Subscribe now and step further into the shadows of history, where every empire has its grave, and every ruler, no matter how mighty, must answer to time.